Five friends left a college basketball game in February 1978. They stopped for snacks on the drive home. They were excited about a tournament they were due to play in the next morning, but they never made it home. Days later, their car was found abandoned high in the California mountains. There was no sign of an accident, no sign of struggle, and no clear reason for why they'd been there at all. 4 of the men would eventually be found. 1 never would. Welcome to the Yuba County Five. On February 24th, 1978, 5 friends travelled from their homes in California to watch a college basketball game at California State University. The group consisted of Jack Madruga, Bill Sterling, Ted Vihar, Jack Hewitt, and Gary Mathias. Basketball was a huge part of their lives. In fact, the following morning they were scheduled to take part in a tournament of their own. Family members would recall later just how excited they were. Some had already laid out their uniforms for the next day. They weren't planning a road trip. They weren't heading into the wilderness. As far as anyone knew, they were simply enjoying a night out before an important game. After watching the match, the group stopped at a convenience store, buying snacks and drinks for the journey home. Witnesses saw nothing unusual. The men seemed relaxed, happy, looking forward to the next day. And then, somewhere on the drive home, something happened. On February 28th, 4 days after the men disappeared, a forest ranger made a discovery. Sitting on a remote mountain road deep within the Plumas National Forest was Jack Madruga's car. It was miles away from the route the men should have taken to get home, and that immediately raised concerns. This wasn't a shortcut, it wasn't even close. Somehow, the group had ended up high in the California mountains, heading in the opposite direction from where they should have been. But the location of the car wasn't the only strange thing. The vehicle wasn't wrecked. It hadn't gone off the road, and although snow had begun to build up around it, investigators would later conclude the car likely hadn't become trapped when it was abandoned. In fact, some believe it could have been driven away. At first, that might not sound particularly unusual. People abandon vehicles all the time. But remember, the men had somewhere important to be the next morning. Their families were expecting them home. Nothing about their plans suggested they will willingly leave a perfectly functional car and disappear into the mountains. Yet that's exactly what appeared to have happened. And the more investigators examined the scene, the less sense it seemed to make. There were no obvious signs of a struggle, and there was no evidence of a crash. There was no clear explanation for why the vehicle had been left behind. It was as if the journey had simply stopped. Search teams began combing the surrounding mountains. At first, there was hope that the 5 men had simply become lost and would eventually find their way back. But as the days passed, that hope began to fade. The terrain was difficult. Snow covered much of the area, and despite extensive searches, there was no sign of the missing men. Weeks turned into months. For the families, every day brought the same question: where were they? Then, in June of 1978, more than 3 months after the men had vanished, investigators finally got an answer. At least, part of one. Deep within the forest, around 20 miles from where the car had been abandoned, searchers discovered a Forest Service trailer. At first glance, it seemed like exactly the sort of place 5 lost men might seek shelter. And in many ways, it was. Inside there were beds, blankets, food supplies, heating equipment. For the first time since the mystery began, investigators could begin to piece together what had happened after the men had left the car. Inside the trailer, investigators made a heartbreaking discovery. One of the missing men had been found. Ted Vihar was lying in a bed, and according to investigators, he hadn't died immediately after arriving there. In fact, evidence suggested he might have survived for several weeks. Now, when I first read that, I genuinely thought I'd misunderstood something, because surviving for weeks means Ted hadn't simply stumbled into the trailer and died from exposure. He'd lived there for quite some time, apparently. Investigators found signs that he'd been cared for, Sheets had been pulled over him, his beard had continued to grow, and at some point, someone had even helped wrap his feet to protect them from the cold. Which raises an obvious question. Who was helping him? Because Ted almost certainly wasn't alone when he first arrived. Someone had been there, at least for a while, but that's where things become difficult to understand. The trailer contained food. Not a little food, enough food to keep several people alive for, well, several months. There were military ration packs, there was canned goods, and even supplies that could have been used to heat the trailer. And yet, much of it remained untouched. Now, I'll be honest, this is part of the case that really gets me, because if you've ever been absolutely starving, you'll know how quickly food becomes, well, the only thing you can think about. Yet investigators found food nearby that had never been opened, and to this day, nobody knows why. Ted eventually died from starvation and exposure, but somehow he'd survived for weeks in a trailer that contained supplies that might have saved his life. And Ted wasn't the only sign that the group had made it to the trailer. Investigators soon discovered evidence suggesting at least some of the others had been there too. One detail in particular stood out. Ted wasn't wearing his own shoes. Instead, he appeared to be wearing shoes belonging to another member of the group. Now, that's a small detail, but it tells us something important. The men didn't all arrive and immediately go their separate ways. At least for a period of time, some of them were together, trying to survive, looking after one another, like friends do. And honestly, I think that's one of the saddest parts of this story, because the deeper you look into the case, the more it feels like these men were doing their best to help each other in a situation they should never have been in. Outside the trailer, investigators eventually discovered the remains of Jack Hewitt and Bill Sterling. Both had succumbed to the harsh conditions. The mountains had claimed them long before help could arrive, but there was still no sign of the entire group. One man remained missing, and his absence would become one of the biggest mysteries in the entire case. Gary Mathias. Gary Mathias was different from the others in one important way. Unlike the rest of the group, Gary had military experience. He'd served in the US Army and was generally considered the most capable outdoorsman among the 5 men. Now, it's important to remember that none of these men had planned some wilderness expedition. They'd gone to watch a basketball game. But if something went wrong, if they became lost, stranded, or found themselves fighting to survive in the mountains, then having someone with Gary's experience would certainly have been an advantage. Don't you think? Which makes what happened next even harder to understand. Investigators found evidence suggesting Gary had likely made it to the trailer. Some of his belongings appeared to have been there, and many believe he'd been one of the people helping Ted to survive. But Gary himself was never found. Not in the trailer, not nearby, just nowhere. Search teams looked for him. Investigators tried to piece together where he might have gone, but no clear answer ever emerged. At some point, Gary Mathias simply disappears from the story. Nearly 50 years later, nobody can say with complete certainty what happened to the Yuba County Five. One of the most common theories is also the simplest, that the men became lost, disorientated, perhaps frightened by something they encountered on the mountain road. In poor weather and unfamiliar surroundings, even experienced hikers can make decisions that seem difficult to understand in hindsight. Others have pointed to Gary Mathias. Because of his history of mental illness, some investigators have wondered whether a psychiatric episode may have played a role in the group's actions that night. However, there has never been any evidence proving that theory. Then there's the account of Joseph Shones, a man who claimed to have seen lights and figures in the mountains on the night the group disappeared. Some believe he may have witnessed the men after they abandoned their car. Others remain skeptical. The problem is that every theory eventually runs into the same obstacle: the trailer. Because no matter how the men ended up there, we're still left with the same unanswered questions. Why wasn't more of the food used? Why wasn't the heating turned on? And what happened to Gary. If you enjoy mystery videos like these, please consider liking, subscribing and ringing the bell to stay updated on future uploads. It really helps DarkLight to grow. And if you have your own theories about what happened to the Yuba County Five, I'd love to hear them. Leave a comment below and join the discussion. So, until next time, remember, question everything, keep safe, toodles.